Hi guys. Today we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system. Before we start getting into the details of the autonomic nervous system, we are going to yet again review the organization of the entire nervous system just so we can keep perspective on where we're mapping our details. The details of the autonomic nervous system are going to include both visceral motor pathways and visceral sensory pathways. And so we're going to be able to put all that stuff together. But first, we must draw our nervous system. And as always, we have a lovely brain and spinal cord to represent the central nervous system. As always, we must have some kind of stimulus that triggers the nervous system into action. The stimulus, we actually talked in the last lecture about all the possible stimuli and the mechanisms by which the stimulus can be translated into an afferent message. So there has to be some kind of receptor, some kind of sensory receptor, and that sensory receptor somehow either is an afferent neuron or is attached to an afferent neuron, but somehow sends the message into the central nervous system via an action potential. So somehow the stimulus gets translated into an action potential that gets sent to the central nervous system. We know that Holy processing happens in the central nervous system, and then we mapped out a couple of options. One of our options for action was the somatic motor pathway, and that included all neurons that innervate skeletal muscle. And that's actually our next topic. So we're going to finish up today looking at the autonomic nervous system, and then we're going to dive into how skeletal muscle is involved in this whole process and how skeletal muscle functions. Today, we're going to look at two different branches of the visceral motor pathway. And all visceral motor pathways, as we know, innervate either cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or glands. And these are the details that we're going to flesh out today. We have two branches of the visceral motor nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, and we're going to look at details, what's exactly going on here. The other thing that we're going to talk a little bit about today is the fact that sometimes this afferent pathway or this receptor up here is a somatic sensory receptor, like all of the somatic sensory receptors we talked about in the last lecture, but sometimes it can be a visceral sensory receptor. And the visceral sensory receptor picks up something, some gut sensation that maybe you're not entirely conscious of. And same thing, that information can be sent to the central nervous system for processing. So in the next section, we're going to look at some specific visceral sensory receptors and some qualities that we can measure. And we're going to look a tiny bit, because I can't help it, at a few places where we might integrate information in the central nervous system, and then the rest of the time we're going to spend focusing on the visceral motor half of the autonomic nervous system. How's that for a fun plan? Okay, let's do it. We're back. We are going to start this whole process by, again, let's draw a map of our entire nervous system. What a great idea. And we'll start with, oh, what is this? Have you ever seen this drawing before? I know you haven't. Let's see. We'll play Pictionary for a little while. Ready? Go ahead. What is it? What kind of information is that? Dogs of a feather. This is somatic sensory information, of course. How did I know that? Because I'm smart, that's how. That's how you knew it, huh? Okay, what's this one? Visceral sensory. How did you know that? Because they're always light blue. Just kidding. Can you tell the difference between them from an anatomical perspective? No, they look exactly the same. Where are these cell bodies? You know the answer to this. All of these cell bodies are found in the posterior, oops, that's not a P. There's the P, posterior root ganglion. So visceral sensory and somatic sensory cell bodies are found in the posterior root ganglion of our spinal cord cross-section. We just don't have our parts of the spinal cord drawn in here, but we totally could do that. We could imagine a cross-section and throw all those guys in on the same pathway. They could also be on different pathways. They can be at any level of the spinal cord. So this information is going to come in from all over the place. Let's look at our efferent pathways. For clarification or for ease of looking at our diagram, I'm going to draw the motor on the right and the sensory on the left. But the fact is the motor on the right? No, of course not. It's on both sides, and the sensory is on both sides. So please do not think that you might get confused about that. Let's draw. I'm going to include some anatomical details in this little diagram that hopefully we will come back to and be accountable for. First of all, do my motor and my sensory always connect? They'll connect if we're dealing with a reflex, but they don't have to connect. And in fact, tell me who I just drew. Can't help it. Have to draw it the same way every single time. Right? Who is this? Of course, this is our friend somatic motor. How did you know? Right here, somatic motor always innervates skeletal muscle. Okay, I think I'm going to run out of room here, but we might have to do a little crisscrossing. I am drawing it anatomically how I want it to be. Who else do we need? Who else do we need to include here? Well, we should probably include some visceral motor. We've got a couple different ways that we can do visceral motor. In fact, let's go ahead and let's make our visceral motor effectors. Visceral motor effectors. Who are they? We know that all visceral motor effectors are smooth muscle. That's smooth muscle. Cardiac muscle. Or who? Glands. All visceral motor innervates these guys. If a fiber is innervating these guys, it is a visceral motor fiber. So we have a couple flavors of visceral motor. Look, here's one flavor. It looks a little something like this. Now, this is an interesting characteristic. Visceral motor fibers have two neurons in a pathway. And look, okay, is this going to hurt your head if I do this? If I go at it like this, oh, sure, let's go around the corner because we are ultimately heading right to our two-neuron pathway to our effector. That's one flavor of visceral motor. We have another flavor of visceral motor that is important to include, and that's this guy. And I am drawing these how I want them. Now look at this one. This one's kind of funny looking. Ha, 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 ha. Just kidding. It wasn't really funny. Don't worry, guys. We don't think you're funny looking. What do you notice about this one? Whoa. What are all my visceral motor fibers innervating? They're all innervating the same thing, even though I have two different colors with some little funky, fun things going on here. We'll talk about all these little characteristics, including this one that I'm about to draw on here. What? What is this, you might ask? You're asking that, aren't you? You know what this is. What? It looks really cute now. He looks like he has some really cool yellow pants. I want yellow pants like that. Let's give this guy some yellow pants too. You're not cool unless you have yellow pants that look like this with the puffy legs. It's myelin, clowns. Yeah, it's a myelin sheath. Now, what do you notice about both of my flavors of visceral motor pathways? Yes, I am going to draw every single little ruffle of myelin, my myelin ruffles, on my visceral motor. For real? Wow. Whew, that's a myelin sheath. Look, neuron number 1 has that crazy myelin sheath. Neuron number 2 doesn't. Neuron number 1 has it. Neuron number 2 doesn't. That's kind of an interesting fast fact. What else do you need to know? Maybe we should make a note of the fact that, would you agree that these guys all in here would be a bundle of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system? What's it called? A ganglion. That's interesting. Do you think this is also a ganglion? Yeah, this is also included in a ganglion. You might think, oh, you know, I mean, why not just have a crazy mess of neurons going everywhere? Well, we know that our, other than visceral sensory, but even visceral sensory is going to travel in a nerve out here in the periphery. Like we could actually find and grab all of these nerves that these fibers are running through. So if we've got all the nerves, which is the bundle of axons, then somewhere on the ends are going to be bundles of cell bodies. So there's going to be ganglia somewhere in the periphery. Look at the difference in my ganglia with my dark green fibers and my light green fibers. These are anatomical characteristics that we are going to look at. Now, here's our overall picture. Now let's look at some specific things that distinguish visceral motor in general from somatic motor.